Welcome to JS on Politics, our weekly look at what's happening in Madison, Milwaukee, and all of state politics. I'm your host, Greg Borowski, and we have a full show for you today. The 4th of July is coming, but it feels like it should be Labor Day. Milwaukee County bus drivers are on strike. We'll take a look at what's behind it. Barack Obama is in La Crosse today to talk about increasing overtime pay. The legislature is back at work on the budget. And will we ever begin construction on a new Milwaukee Bucks arena? We'll cover all of that and end with some reader questions. But first, we're going to start with the Milwaukee County Transit System bus strike. We're joined by Don Boehm, our Milwaukee County government reporter. This is an unusual strike in the sense we know exactly when it's going to be over. 72-hour strike. But talk about, we're halfway into it. Who's winning the perception battle right now? Or do you think people are siding more with the union's case or the county and the company's case on this issues?
Well, I don't think either side is gaining friends. The bus drivers are on the picket lines. They're not being joined by a lot of non-union members on the picket lines. There were a few teachers union folks out there the other day. But people are honking as they drive by, but the picket lines aren't being maintained all day and all night long. I drove by Fond du Lac Avenue last night around 6. There were only about a dozen people on the picket line. I think the bus drivers, not perception, but they have made their point that that this is a basic service and it disrupts people's lives without it, and I think that was why they went off the job for 72 hours.
I think more people know today how much a bus driver makes than they ever did before. I mean, so
Sure.
Both sides getting information out there on the bus drivers. The AFL-CIO put out a press release, but that's about it in terms of their support. Teachers union, as he said, a few people have been out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, they clearly chose this time for a reason. They didn't do this 2 weeks ago. It's in the middle of Summerfest. A lot of people use the bus to get around that might or not otherwise do so. But
Right, the July 3rd, the day before the 4th, is actually the busiest day of the year for the bus drivers.
it's all on the fireworks.
It's all fireworks and Summerfest. So they chose the busiest time of the year to do this.
All right, well, let's look at, as I was looking at this earlier, we kind of have the 4 Ps. We've got pay, pensions, part-time drivers, and potty breaks, right? So what is the key
Yes.
issue here that really is what's driving the strike and the inability to come to a resolution?
I would say pay and part-time drivers, potty breaks, the idea of bathroom breaks is really more of an emotional issue for these drivers. But for contract bargaining, it's pay and part-timers. They rejected contract offers that gave them 2% cost of living increases each year, plus a 1% pay increase the second year of the contract. The drivers I talked to and union leaders do not consider the cost of living raises a pay increase. They just consider that the base that should go forward.
If you contrast, though, I think we get a lot of people out there who they may not be seeing any raises in their jobs. Or things. Do you think, Dan, how do you think it's that, when you see a pay raise like that and some of these other benefits and things, do people identify with the bus drivers or not?
To tell you the truth, I think most people who use the buses don't identify with them. They see that they aren't getting a ride to work. The $62,000 is substantially higher than what most people think bus drivers are making. But
well, that's base pay plus overtime.
Right, and it includes overtime, and that's an important point. And it's a dicey thing to do this during Summerfest because a lot of people are getting drunk and they could be driving now instead of taking the bus. So it's a calculated risk. But as I wrote today, the biggest loser in this is probably Supervisor John Weishawn. I got a memo from the bus drivers union in which it lays out a discussion in which on Sunday he was advising them to go on strike or to do a sick out if they didn't get what they wanted, and they ended up doing that.
Right, and he's one who's been very critical of Chris Abley about it. So there's that perception of the 5th P of politics here.
He's been saying this is all Chris Abley, the county executive's fault. But at the same time, behind the scenes, he's telling them to go ahead and use whatever rights and responsibilities you have to draw attention to what you're doing.
Yeah, we cover the county board. Talk about John Weishawn. What was your impression of that letter and memo that came out?
Well, I was surprised that Supervisor Weishawn had done that behind the scenes. There doesn't seem to be a lot of talk about it yet at the county courthouse. I checked in with a few workers up there today, and no one's saying, oh, he stepped over the line or that was unethical. That discussion might develop. But I think the Weishan reporting by Dan provides some insight as to why transit system officials were surprised by the hard line taken by the union at the last minute. You have to remember they were in negotiations on Tuesday, kind of a final mediation session. Monday the contract was rejected. Tuesday the final mediation, and the bus drivers decided to go through with their strike threat. That caught the transit system by surprise. They were not expecting them to actually follow through on the strike, and Weishan's intervention might explain that hard line.
It's also interesting, you see the relationship between the union and Supervisor Weishan. He's drafting a bill that would spell out some of the stuff that he thinks should be in the contract, and he sends a note, he tells them, I'm going to send you a draft of this according to the legislative director for the union, and I want you to edit what I've written and insert anything else you want in there. It's something you don't even see usually at the legislature. You occasionally see them saying, well, we'd like you to put this in there, but it's a little more bald than what you usually see.
Well, we're going to stick with the P's and move on to our next topic, which is presidential politics. And in this tape segment, we're going to take a look at Barack Obama, who's visiting Wisconsin today. We're joined now by Washington Bureau Chief Craig Gilbert to talk a little bit about President Barack Obama's visit this afternoon to Wisconsin. Craig, he's coming to La Crosse. Can you tell us a little bit about what his message is as he's touring the country these days on overtime?
Yeah, obviously it's an economic message. The president is trying to do some things that he can do on his own without Congress. Obviously, Republican Congress that agrees with almost no part of his agenda. And over time, what he's talking about doing is raising the threshold for the level of pay at which a worker should get time and a half pay. And that threshold has essentially eroded in real terms because of inflation. And so he's trying to bring it back to where it was effectively in the 1970s, but has been eroding since then.
All right, and do you think, that issue, it's on one level it feels kind of obscure, but it's important just because he's been pushing for improvements in the workforce and the general economy and economics for working class people?
Yeah, and it's important because obviously economic inequality is a real issue. It's going to be part of the presidential debate. It's certainly a big issue for Democratic candidates. And the president also just won a legislative victory on trade, taking kind of a expansive pro-trade position, which was resisted by labor unions and a lot of people, a lot of Democrats who see trade as a threat to wages. So this is also, I think, a way to speak to those concerns.
All right, let's talk a little bit about sort of the last week for President Obama, because he's coming to Wisconsin after a very successful week on a variety of fronts. He got the trade deal, which you mentioned, with help from the Republicans in Congress. Obamacare is upheld by the Supreme Court. Same-sex marriage. There's all the Confederate flag issues and the changes there in South Carolina that are to come. Talk a little bit about where he stands today in terms of the last year and a half or so of his presidency.
Yeah, well, his numbers eroded last year. They have gotten a little bit better this year. This is prior to all these events you mentioned in the last week. But right now he's close to 50-50 in the polling. He's still a little bit below water in some polls. He's slightly above water in Wisconsin, where he's historically been a little bit more popular than he has been across the country. The last good poll we had, his approval rating was a couple points higher than his disapproval rating, and his his personal image was favorable, as it has been for a long time. So things are looking up, certainly in that respect, for the president, and it matters. It matters. It's going to matter in the 2016 election cycle what his public standing is, what his approval rating is, how people regard him, because it's going to affect the presidential race, and it's going to affect races like our Senate race between Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson. The more popular President Obama is as he leaves office, probably the better Hillary Clinton's going to do, and the better Democratic candidates, Senate candidates like Russ Feingold, are going to do, and vice versa.
Let's talk a little bit about the 2016 election for Democrats. Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont, was in Madison Wednesday night, and he's in the race against Hillary Clinton. What do you think that does to the dynamics of that race for former Senator Clinton in terms of how it causes her to go one way or the other in her positioning?
Yeah, it's kind of unpredictable. I mean, his impact will be felt. I think there has been an appetite for an alternative to Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party. I think he has a ceiling for a number of reasons. I mean, if you look at the composition of the Democratic vote, a big percentage of those voters are blacks and Hispanics, and we don't really have a lot of reason to think that Bernie Sanders is going to get a lot of black and Hispanic votes in this process. There are some states where he could do really well. There's some places like Madison where they're kind of tailor-made for him in some respects. But there's a lot of other places where he's going to have a low ceiling, and it's going to be hard for him to break through because of the demographics of the Democratic vote, because of the region of the country. So it's very difficult for him to compete with Hillary Clinton on a national level for that reason, obviously for money reasons as well. But it does change the dynamic of the Democratic primary. It could be a positive in some respects for Hillary Clinton, but there will be, Bernie Sanders will make her life difficult at times in the next several months.
All right. Well, that'll be a good spot to leave it, because in the next few weeks we'll be talking a lot more about the other side of the ticket as Governor Walker moves closer to his formal announcement. So thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
All right, we're back live and joined now by James Causey, who's one of our editorial columnists. And from Madison, we've got Jason Stein, who can fill us in on the budget doing. So we should say Happy New Year, at least Happy New Fiscal Year. We don't have a budget yet. We're into the new stage. We do have a deal. Jason, this is a deal, but is it a deal when one of the legislative leaders says, I don't really have the votes to pass the deal? Give us a sense of what's happening on the budget right now.
Well, I think it got billed. Yesterday's announcement got billed as, well, we're going to have a budget deal. I mean, what they really had was they had an agreement to get the budget bill moving again. I mean, it had been stuck in the Joint Finance Committee for a month, and they got a deal to get it kicked out today or sometime after midnight, early Friday morning. I was just over there about 10 minutes ago. And then, you got to get into your old-fashioned arm twisting, leg twisting to get the votes to get it through the Senate. I think that will happen, but obviously they're not there yet.
There's still a lot of dealing. They say there's a deal, but that's what's going to be going on, where people are, as he says, arm twisting, making offers and swapping and trying to get people to get on board for the deal. But this happens almost every time, where you're close to a deal and then a few people are holding out. Prevailing wage will be one of the things they discuss. But that's so they say they have a deal, but now this is when the real wheeling and dealing occurs.
Yeah, let me ask you, Jason, so one of the parts of it that there seems to be more of a consensus on is the zoo interchange and the transportation budget, and by taking prevailing wage and the Bucks Arena out of the budget, they think that'll maybe make it easier to move. But talk on the transportation. So the zoo, is it going to be delayed, not delayed? Where does that come down?
They split the baby a little bit on that one. Basically what happens is, the zoo interchange, busiest interchange in the state, brings together interstates 94 and 894 and Highway 45. And so the work that you see going on there west of Milwaukee will continue and will get finished. So if those contracts have been let, they'll get finished. But the next phase of that work, which would be the north side of the interchange involving US Highway 45, that will be delayed for some unspecified period of time, the start of that work.
All right, James, what's your take on how does this all look? Especially in the backdrop of Scott Walker says we get things done in Wisconsin. Is this coming together all right for him or not?
Well, they do take time to get done. It's interesting that they had to take the Buck side of this budget. I don't think any Democrats would have voted for the budget as it was. So I don't know if this makes it may make it a little bit easier for Democrats to get on board with the Bucks Arena. That's a really big piece of it. But it will eventually get done. It's just going to take a lot of arm wrangling.
So,
right now.
Dan, one of the things that's been working in tandem politically anyways with the budget is Governor Walker's announcement, and today he took another one of these little steps, albeit a very significant one, that he's filed his paperwork to run for president He's going to announce
July
July
13th.
13th,
Right.
as we reported before.
Yeah, about a month ago, we reported that that was the day he was locked in, and now he's finally officially saying yes, that he's locked in, going to make the announcement in Waukesha. And he had made this point that he wouldn't announce until a budget was signed, which means approved by both houses, vetoes, and all that. That might not happen, but the thing is, everything's rolling and it's moving in that direction. He is locked in on the 13th. There will be an announcement on that day whether the budget's finally completed or not. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. So for his perfect world, though, the governor, I suppose he'd have the budget signed and have gone through his vetoes and reshape it just how he wants it, right? I mean, Jason, what do you think the odds are that in this next, week and a half, 2 weeks here, that we would be able to get it to that point, and Walker Road can step up on the stage and say, look, we do get things done, and here are all the things we just accomplished in this budget?
I tend to think he can't get it done because the soonest I think the Assembly could vote on the budget would be Tuesday into early Wednesday morning. Then you're looking at the Senate maybe coming in on a Thursday. And that just gives the governor a few days to consider partial vetoes. And you got to understand that our governor has the most powerful partial veto pen in the nation. I think typically a governor will want a week, 10 days, something like that, to decide what he's going to veto out of the budget. I mean, he could certainly conceivably get it done sometime over the weekend, not this weekend, but the next. But that would really be blazing speed.
But nobody's going to vote against him because he didn't keep his pledge to have the budget done completely by the time he announced. So it's sort of an artificial deadline, just like the June 30th deadline for the budget is artificial. But the thing is, he's the one who said it was artificial, but he's the one who created it by saying this is what the criteria is. So it works metaphorically. Over the last couple of months, people have been saying, what's more important, what's going on in Wisconsin with the budget bill or his presidential campaign? And as we see here, the presidential announcement trumps what's going on in the state. He will get through it. He will do his vetoes, but it shows to everybody that this is what's most important to him, is getting in this presidential race.
Well, and he's unofficially been running for months anyway, so it doesn't really make much difference anyway.
What's going on right now are just all these legal requirements that he do, the testing the waters thing, the Our American Revival. These are all just steps in the process that he's got to follow legally.
Okay, let's talk briefly about something in the news today. U.S. Attorney Jim Santel, who's an appointee of Barack Obama, decided today he is stepping down. There's about a year and a half or so left in his term.
Right.
At least in Barack Obama's term. What's the takeaway from this, Dan?
The important things to know, one, he's stepping down, as you said, a year and a half early, which makes it very difficult to put someone in there who can be effective and do anything. So Greg Honstad, one of the assistant U.S. attorneys, will step in and probably run this office. But it's not been a high-profile office during his whole tenure, his 5 or 6 years there. Compare or contrast to his predecessor, Steve Biskupic, who did a lot of white-collar crime, a lot of political corruption. Santel has done almost none of that. In fact, I talked to him about this shortly after he came into office, and he said, this was one of his top priorities, and he'd be talking to me regularly about what's going on those fronts. Well, that's the last time I talked to him.
And James, have you ever talked to Jim Santel? When have you last written about him?
No.
I mean, he hasn't been in the news a lot.
He hasn't been in the news a lot, and I can't even think of anything high profile that he's done. I mean, can you name anything?
Well, their focus has been on terrorism and other related sort of things, and that's a high profile in Washington. But here, you notice the U.S. attorneys when they get involved in political corruption or major crime, gang busts, that sort of stuff. And he's just been a very low profile guy who's kept things going. In fact, the most attention he's gotten is for the investigation of him for his use of credit cards while he was in office.
And that's certainly the backdrop right now.
And that's what's driving the decision to go ahead and leave early.
All right. The Bucks are in the news today. Not about an arena deal, but about Greg Monroe, who James is quite excited about. But let's talk about that arena deal. So we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and there's another one of these deals that maybe is a deal or not quite a deal. It's out of the budget. Jason, can you give us a sense of why they took that approach, and does that make it easier or harder for it to pass?
Well, I can tell you why they took that approach. They had no choice. I mean, they wanted to pass it as part of the budget. it would have been easier to pass it as part of the budget. There's this lingering doubt about whether they can pass it at all outside the budget. But they had a majority of Republican senators saying, I do not want this provision as part of the state budget. And so there you go. It's out.
It is interesting that the talk from Madison is that this thing is in jeopardy or that there's some questions about. But I've been in touch with the Bucks and with people close to Walker, and both of them remain incredibly confident that something's going to be done. The question is, does it happen this summer or does it happen in September? It's, some people are even giving me figures saying that they're sure it's 80 to 90% sure that it's going to get done, but it's a very different message that you hear in Madison.
How many times did the Brewers deal fall apart from Miller Park before it was done? So, are you nervous about this? I know you support a new arena, but...
Right. I support a new arena. I'm still very confident that it will get done. I just don't, I want to know which politician wants to be the person that votes against it and have the Bradley Center closed by the year 2030, and there's no Bradley Center, and then you look at the Park East and it's abandoned still. I want to know.
There's lots of politicians who want to be the one to vote against it, right? If
we'll
you're from
see.
outstate somewhere, you don't particularly care much if you can tell your taxpayers you're not giving money to the arena.
Right. This thing has been up and down in the Capitol. Right now, I would say the sense that I am getting is that it can be passed through the state Senate. I think it can absolutely be passed through the state Assembly. The question is the state Senate. I think it can get through. But hey, let me tell you, there are some people that are lining up to vote against it. And I'll tell you, they're the kinds of people like, say, Senator Rob Coles. He represents a district that had to, an area that had to tax itself to build Lambeau Field. And so he says, look, these are the Green Bay Packers. They're practically a sacred, part of Wisconsin. And we didn't get any state help. We had to build that for ourselves. And so, a lot of people in his district and Rob himself just say, look, we don't think the Bucks deserve state income tax money any more than the Green Bay Packers did. So, there are just going to be people that are going to vote no for those reasons.
Two things. One, it was interesting, even their vote on raising taxes for the Green Bay Packers, only 53% of the people voted for that, even though it's much more popular than the Bucks in the state. And then two, in 2010, 2011, the legislature passed a $5 million grant to give to the Bradley Center for the Bucks scoreboard. A very minor thing, something 1/100th the size of what we're talking about. And that was used as a political and campaign issue against a number of Democrats who voted for it. So a lot of people will be nervous that an arena deal for Milwaukee, it would hurt, would be something that the voters in their district, it just won't resonate with.
But we know it's not just a Bucks arena, though. We need to quit talking about it like only the Bucks benefit. And the arena is open 280 plus days out of the season, out of a year, and the Bucks play there 42 games out of a year.
You sound like Robin Voss. That's true. It has a lot of benefits.
I don't think I've ever been confused with Robin Voss before.
But the thing is, during election season, it's all about who's going to win this seat or that seat and what can you use against them.
Everyone would agree, I think, that we need support from all the Milwaukee Democrats, right? To do this, and probably people like Alberta Darling and others who have a good stake in the region. So are the Milwaukee Democrats in the Senate behind it?
You have Senator Carpenter, who's running for alderman. He's already indicated that he's against. The other ones will probably get on board, but we talked earlier about the season of wheeling and dealing. The season of wheeling and dealing hasn't started on the Bucks arena. Yep. If I'm a Democrat in the Senate, I want something in return for voting for this.
Jason, do you think the deal, so there's optimism that this deal could pass, but is it going to need to be reworked at all? I know there's pressure that the city and county should take on a greater proportion of the costs. What do you see in your crystal ball? How does this actually get through the Senate and then, of course, the Assembly?
Well, I tell you, there's going to be some new wrinkles. That is just life in general, and certainly it's life in the marble Disneyland of the state capitol. I think here's the deal. This whole thing has been worked out between Republicans and the Milwaukee Bucks. Now they need at least several Democratic senators to vote for this bill. They were never a part of the talks. So, although there were Democrats, the Milwaukee mayor and county exec were involved, but not Democratic lawmakers. Just realistically, they will probably achieve something, right? Some change to the bill or some gain for their constituents elsewhere in exchange for their votes. I mean, that's typically how politics works.
And you brought up the Miller Park deal. No one could have predicted how that was going to turn out with a senator flip-flopping at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's still a lot of stuff to happen.
Well, let me ask you a prediction for the two guys sitting here. Does the deal pass as is, or does it have to be revived or renegotiated and pass, or does it fail, James?
I think it passes. I'm not quite sure if it passes as is, but I'm more than confident that it passes.
I'm terrible at making predictions. I think it
That's
passes.
why we do this, Dan.
I know, just
it's
to
on
embarrass
tape
me.
too, just so you know.
I think it passes, but I think it probably in a different form. The big issue for the team is if it waits until September, it starts driving up the cost of building the thing, and that adds a completely new wrinkle to to the deal.
All right, we're going to whip through some reader questions here at the end, and the first one is about the bucks. It's from a reader, Keep the Bucks. It says, shouldn't the city and county pony up more to keep the bucks? If it's not in the state budget, why is any lawmaker from Superior going to vote for the new arena? We kind of touched on that, but then again, city, county, do you think there's any room there for the mayor or the executive to put more on the table?
Sure, the city could put more money in. They've been very defensive and have not put a lot of money in. With the county, you've got this questionable certification of debt thing that's in there. So sure, but there's another issue too. Do the owners put more money in too? That's not yet been resolved as to whether that $250 million is as high as they're going to go.
All right, let me ask this one of James. This is from a reader, Back to Work. He says, I'd love to have a job that pays me $60,000 and lets me retire before I'm 50. Sign me up. Aren't the drivers being ridiculous with their demands? We're talking about the bus strike, of course.
Of course, we're talking about the bus strike. I think the drivers did have legitimate complaints. I don't know if a strike was a way to go about making sure that they were known, but now, like Dan said earlier, we know what every bus driver makes.
Still, sign me up. I really have no interest in driving a bus for 8 hours or 10 hours a day with all of the issues you have to deal with.
Exactly.
It's not an easy job. The pay's higher than you expected, but no one should think driving a bus is fun or easy.
It's not easy.
All right, this is a question for Jason. It's from a reader named James. I'm not sure if this is our James or some other James. So it says, the question is, so is this it? Is the budget finally over, or will this continue to drag on like a bad movie? So are you sure it's not you, James?
It's not me.
It's not this James. But Jason, what do you think? We talked a little bit about this before, but is this just drag on, or are we getting close to a resolution?
I think, we're getting close to a resolution, absolutely. I think you will see a vote in the state assembly on the budget on Tuesday or Wednesday. I think you will, I don't know if the Senate votes next week or the week after that, but, I think the budget will be at a point where even though it's probably not going to be done before Scott Walker announces the run for president, it's going to be far enough along that he can sort of brush off criticism and say, well, we're getting it pretty close to the finish line, and the finish line is in sight.
All right, and this last one is from Matt from Madison, and it's a direct question for Dan, who says, Dan, you always do music picks. It's part of your
When I'm doing
regular chats and things.
like
Who
to
says,
ask me that.
Says, who should I go see at Summerfest this weekend?
Did you go to Kendrick Lamar? I would have liked to have gone.
Why would you assume I would go to Kendrick?
I don't know. I just like Kendrick Lamar. Tonight, I would go to Fox and Edward Sharpe. Sylvan Esso on Friday night is a band I like. The Avett Brothers, I've heard them repeatedly, like them, and their opener, Brandy Carlisle. The thing ends with Neil Young, so we start with the senior citizens and we end with the senior citizens.
You get a discount for the senior citizen ticket or something for some
There are
of
Isley Brothers in there. I think they're coming too.
They are.
All right, so our main advice is if you're going to Summerfest, don't take the bus, at least for the time being. That'll wrap us up for today. Enjoy the 4th, and we'll see you back next week.